Welcome back to Invasive Brews, everybody. I know it's been a while, but I do want to apologize for kind of being absent for a while. A lot's happened in the last few months. I've moved, I've planned and successfully got married, but I haven't been slacking on the conservation front. I was, in fact, the primary delegate of Kansas at the National Wildlife Federation conference up in Minneapolis this summer. And one of the talks was all about the silver carp issue, the invasive silver carp issue that a lot of states are facing right now. And some of the states that were there kind of shared their success stories and what they've been doing with the silver carp and bighead carp issues. So I wanted to share that talk with you guys here.
This is not a real picture. This is a mocked-up picture. But before I start talking about carp, I wanted to show you, because I think this video will explain to you exactly. So what you saw jumping, and our friends at the BBC were filming that, I think, in certain stretches of the Illinois River around Peoria. Do you think that's accurate, Robert? I think it's sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes. But any river that has carp, particularly silver carp, is going to be faced with this situation. So what you saw here was one species of, there's 5 species of carp. There's of invasive carp. There's the bighead, the silver, this is the silver. There's the black carp, the grass carp, and the common carp. The ones that are particularly problematic are the silver, the bighead, and the grass. What we're going to talk about today is the silver and the bighead. The silver are the ones that jump and cause a problem. They do the river fish, so they do spawn in the river systems. These are the bighead, the other one that is the problematic. These do not jump. These get much larger, as you can tell, I think up to about 60 pounds. They do, if the situation and the conditions are right in a river system, they can, sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear me, they can breed up to twice a year. So I like to say they breed like mosquitoes and eat like hogs, and they're a problem. So we don't want them in our waterways for obvious reasons. And the reason, number one, besides the jumping, is that these are very opportunistic fish. They filter feed. They basically wipe out all the nutrients and the food forage for our desirable fish that we want. So there are stretches of certain rivers where these are populated that are up to 90% of the fish biomass in the river system. So they completely outcompete all the fish that we want, and they're a problem. So where did they come from? How did they get here? Now this map's a little dated, so just bear with me, but it definitely tells the story. So essentially in the 70s, carp were brought in from mostly China, but there might have been some other places out in Asia that were brought in to filter feed out stock ponds and algae from stock ponds in the south. As you would imagine, through flooding, they got into the streams and rivers, made their way into the Mississippi, and they have been swimming north ever since. Now this stops, I think, in 2011. Any river system that does not have a barrier is subject to okay? So our stories we're going to talk about are Chicago, Minnesota, Indiana there, and right in here, in this area, whole area here. So that's how we got here. Why not just fish them out of the water? Yes, you can do that, but you'll never fish them completely out of the water. So there's been a lot of efforts from multiple states to incentivize the commercial harvest of these fish. And the only problem with them is that they are really hard to process and fillet. So most of the use of these fish are for fertilizer, ground up, or for cat food. Or if you are a freshman at the University of Illinois, you can have carp patties that serves you. Now they are good. I've had them. I'm sure a lot of. I think Robert and I, John has had. Of course, you have here. Yeah.
Not bad.
It's good stuff, but you'll never be able to fish them out of the water. There's not enough marketability for the commercial fishermen to bring these fish to market. There's just not enough profit there. So this effort needs to continue to fish them down and use them however best we can, but you'll never get them out of the water. So the only way to really prevent them from further spread is using this eating and fishing them down, but you gotta have it coupled with some controls, some barriers that we're gonna be talking about. That's the projects that we're gonna be highlighting. So the first one we're gonna talk about is Chicago. Now, Is everyone familiar with Chicago? This is Navy Pier here, downtown. The canal system throughout Chicago is pretty popular for a lot of reasons. It's dyed green for St. Patrick's Day. It's a great architecture tour, but it's also a pathway for carp. What people might not realize is back in the 1880s, 1890s, Chicago had a huge industry that was dumping all their waste into the Chicago River, flowing out to Lake Michigan, the same place where they were just intaking their water for drinking. So instead of stopping the pollution, they said, let's not do that. Let's just continue to dump all the waste into the river and flush it down to St. Louis. So now you have the reason why the Cubs and the Cardinals are big, huge rivals now. But that huge project, I'm just kidding there, but the project that caused that diversion from the Chicago River going into Lake Michigan, now going down to the Mississippi River, caused a pathway for invasive species to transfer. And this is what I bring up this, anyone know what this is?
Round goby.
Why are round goby bad? Any guesses?
Invasive species.
They are invasive. They are brought in through ballast water from, I think, the South Central Asia. These are notoriously effective at eating fry, smallmouth bass in particular. So anyone who's ever fished on a rock jetty in Lake Michigan, you're catching 9 out of 10, you're catching these things. And the DNRs, literally, they tell you when you catch them, throw them up in the air for the seagulls to eat them. So these are horrible, and the one thing that was provided to potentially stop the round goby from Lake Michigan going through Chicago, the waterway systems down to the Mississippi River, was an electrical barrier system. So in and around Joliet, Illinois, the first dispersal barrier project was to build, literally putting in electrical barriers through the waterways to prevent the round goby from moving south into the Mississippi River. 1990s, I think it was late 90s, was brought in. Now these barriers it allows commerce to continue, but fish don't like it. They remove themselves from the area. They don't want to be electrocuted. Who would want to be electrocuted? So you leave the area. But it does allow some smaller fry to get through in the wake of commerce and boats. So it's not fully effective, but it is the only deterrent that we have right now. It was originally put in for the round goby. This is just an overview of the canal system that the barges use to go through in between the lakes and the Mississippi River. Okay, so here we are. Carp are continuing to swim. Sorry, I'm just gonna get a drink here. What happened that brought everyone to our red alert was in 2009, carp eDNA, which is basically evidence of fish scales or feces or some sort of particulate from a carp. You can monitor it, and it's detected within 24 to 48 hours of a carp being in that water body. That was detected above the electrical barriers on the Lake Michigan side. Freaked everyone out. Michigan sues Chicago, close the locks, keep carp out of Lake Michigan. We can't destroy the $5.1 billion fishing industry, the $15 billion boating industry of Lake Michigan. It was a political, chaotic mess. In 2019, an emergency response was put together to dump rotenone, which is it's a last resort type of treatment to eradicate fish. It basically it's an organic compound that basically depletes the oxygen in the water. Up to 55,000 pounds of fish were removed. One silver carp out of that 55,000 pounds. We didn't want to continue rotenone, as you just don't want to continue to nuke water bodies. That's not what we want to do for our river systems. Even though the Chicago waterway system is a man-made canal, it's for flood management, it's also for moving water, it's kind of a sewage system, it's not a recreation destination, but we still don't want to do this to our waterways. So it was never going to be a constant roteoning this water body. Live bighead carp was caught in Lake Calumet on the Lake Michigan side, and a live silver was caught in 2017. So this spawned a lot of conversations about what do we do with this. So the Corps of Engineers in 2007 just happened to be looking at ways, was told by Congress to authorize them to look at ways to prevent the transfer of invasive species between the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes. So Corps began a study process that identified what are those vectors that are open to transfer species. They identified a bunch of other pathways that we're going to be talking about. One of them being Chicago as probably the main vector. So here's a close-up, thanks to Prairie Rivers Network for this map. Here's anyone familiar with Chicago. Here's downtown Chicago, Navy Pier. You can tell there's about 5 entry points in. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Further south away from Lake Michigan, this is the leading edge of carp. Here's the Brandon Road Lock and Dam. Here's the Lockport Dam, and here are the electrical barriers. Beyond that, there's nothing that would prevent carp from moving forward. So all those ED&A hits, all those live captures, Lake Calumet is about right, I think it's right here. No,
It's that blue body right there.
yeah, right here. So obviously all these indicators of carp that made it above the barriers caused alarms. So a lot of conversations ensued that were really about closing the locks. Can we permanently stop the transfer of water? Dumping earth into the canal, making a cement wall. But then what happens when you just pour that? That's the easy part. The problem is what happens to that water if you block that water. The water needs to flow. So you're going to flood downtown Chicago. That water has to go elsewhere. So long conversations happened about how do we do this. It was politically and economically not feasible until we look at Brandon Road Lock and Dam, farther away, closer to where the carp are, the leading edges, quote unquote. And this Brandon Road Lock and Dam kind of became a consensus of the best choke point we could find that would be out of this area, that wouldn't be as expensive, get closer to where the carp are, and be below the electrical barriers, so that if you were to have a fishing down strategy, coupled with the electrical barriers, plus a lock and dam that had some controls on it, cumulatively, you'll have a better chance at preventing the transfer. There's never 100% transfer. There's never 100% foolproof. There's no silver bullet. But this would, layers of protections that would add up to be a little bit more protection to stopping carp moving up. So Brandon Road became basically the project that was moving forward. Congress came in, authorized. This is the overview of the lock here, and here is the dam on this side. Here's the lock chamber. This is an approach channel here. They come in here, raise the water up, the barge goes in, raises up, and all they go to Lake Michigan. So the project was to keep commerce going, but improving the lock to add in some control technologies to reduce the threat. So what that looks like is, here's the overview of this. Here's that lock right here where we just looked at the barge going through. Before the ship comes in, this is the approach channel. You would have a series of deterrents put in from bubbles under the water that blow up from underneath that kind of cause it a little bit of a barrier. Fish don't want to go through that. There was a lot of conversation about would another electric barrier be in there. It's quite controversial for some folks. And I think Illinois was not necessarily happy with that. They still might not be happy with that. And then before the ship goes into the lock chamber, there's a flushing lock. So before the ship goes in, they would blow water cannons to blow back any undesirable fish, or any fish for that matter, before the ship goes into the lock chamber. So essentially, we call this like a gauntlet of technology. They would add a couple boat stream launches for recreational use here, and here, and maybe even down here further. So this became the project that is moving forward. Congress authorized it. Congress appropriated the first year of it. Here's the trick. This is a federal project, but it's based in Illinois. So Illinois has to be the non-federal sponsor. That's the course process. So Illinois, the best way I can say is, may not want this project. I'll put it that way. So they were not very helpful along the way. They probably caused more delay than probably needed to be. But either way, we got to this point, and the federal government now will pay 90% of this, 9% of this, and Illinois will pay 10 as a non-federal sponsor. The reason behind that is that we were making a case that federal government should pay the entire thing, because this is a Great Lakes system that benefits everyone, not just one state. This project is based in Illinois. It doesn't have to be Illinois' burden. So we understand that. So we're trying to remove that burden. Just for example, the Sault Ste. Marie locks that are based in Michigan benefit the entire Great Lakes. All commerce benefits from that. But because they're in Michigan, why should Michigan front the bill for this entire project? That project was fully federally funded to replace the whole locks. So we use that as an example of like, this project is as beneficial to the Great Lakes as the Sault Ste. Marie locks is. Illinois should not pay for this whole thing. So Illinois is no longer just the only non-federal sponsor. The state of Michigan actually joined with them to help pay and assume liability for this project. So you have two states playing the role as a non-federal sponsor, which is not unusual, but it just shows the level of support beyond Illinois for this project. So, long story short, just last summer, Illinois finally signed an agreement to move forward on construction. And that was a big deal to get us to that point. And just last, about a week, 10 days ago, Illinois finally acquired the property adjacent to the lock for the Corps to begin construction. So this is what's interesting about this is it's a big deal, it's progress, but in classic Illinois fashion, they acquired the land, but they only transferred the bottomlands part of the project to the Corps to continue the construction. Illinois still needs to transfer the uplands, which is probably the most important part because that's where the Corps will stage. So it's just another way, in our opinion, to have Illinois just constantly being that hornet that's always flying around. I can't tell you what's in the head of the governor's mind on this. It could be presidential politics. It could be, his, being antagonistic with the Trump administration. I'm not exactly sure. Either way, Illinois still has to move forward on this. Now, I will say, here's some pictures I have of the construction. As you can see, this is the approach channel. There's this beam here. Corps is just trying to dig out the riverbed, bottomlands, because they're going to pour concrete in here and make it an approach channel full of concrete, easier for them to add technologies across the channel. And this parcel over here is the upland parcel that the Corps will need that Illinois still has to transfer. Better picture here, some of the construction happening right now. So that still remains. So this story is a progress, but it's still in a work in progress. And it's not without controversy still, right? So we still have a lot of work to do to prevent invasives coming down through Lake Michigan down through, right? So that's one thing that we're going to continue to work on. It's a little bit more troubling to do that because we really don't know the best place to do that. Or how would you keep invasive species coming down beyond the electrical barriers through the Mississippi River? So, success story, biggest one. I'll stop there. You'll be plenty of rooms for questions there, but I'm going to pass it on to Christine Goepfert. There's another little picture for you guys. I'll leave with this. We still have a lot of work to do. This is from Bath, Illinois. There's a redneck fishing tournament that these guys do. It's comical at first, but it's kind of not a laughing matter anymore, but I'm a big fan of The Office, so I like this. So a lot of more work to do, but I'm going to pass it off to Christine Goepfert to talk a little bit about our efforts here in Minnesota.
I just sit here with that?
You can do it however you use, whatever makes you happy.
Well, great. Awesome. Not that I'm lazy or anything, but I did. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Goepfert. I'm the Midwest Campaign Director with the National Parks Conservation Association. We're a national advocacy organization that advocates for the national parks, as you can guess. I'm also the co-chair of the Stop Carp Coalition, and I have my other co-chair with me right now, next to me, Colleen, and you'll hear from her. All right, so success story. I'm bringing it closer to home here in Minnesota. So I don't know if you've explored yet and found that we have the Mississippi River here, and it cuts right through the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it's a great resource for us to recreate. We have folks you can see, can go out in the river and have a great view of the Minneapolis skyline, so hopefully on your field trips tomorrow, if you haven't already visited the river, you'll see that. But as noted, we're here to talk about carp. Mark told you why we don't want carp, but I will just say here in Minnesota, the first carp was a grass carp that was found in 1977 in Minnesota in a pond in Winona, followed by a bighead found in the Lake St. Croix, and that was in 1996. And eventually a silver was caught in the Mississippi River in Minnesota in Pool 8, which is our southern pool, and that was in 2008. So we kept, the catches of carp kept increasing to the point, I think we were at like 10 individuals a year, and right around the time that they were getting alarmed because of eDNA results, which we had here too, that was happening here. We're like, uh-oh, what are we gonna do about this? So our state partnered with other federal agencies and other carp experts, and developed the state's first invasive carp action plan that really laid out what we can do to sort of assess and minimize the threat of invasive carp in Minnesota waterways. And that first plan was developed in 2011, and that's actually when my organization opened a field office here, and I started with NPCA. So at that time, I was new to the Twin Cities and trying to figure out what I was going to work on, and I went and visited the superintendent of the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, which is our closest national park. It's 72 miles of the Mississippi River, starting in Anoka, Ramsey, all the way down to Hastings. And the superintendent, the first thing he brought up to me was, hey, we got this problem, we got invasive carp in our waters, what can you do as an advocacy organization? And I didn't even know what invasive carp were, so I was like, okay, we'll see. But he noted it was a threat to visitors. They're bringing people out in the water, and it's not gonna be an enjoyable experience if they're getting hit in the face. I also met with the superintendent at the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, who also noted this was their major priority. And I was like, okay, I'm sensing a trend here. So we immediately realized that this was going to be a priority for us as an organization, because it was impacting 2 national parks here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And at that time, I started meeting this guy over here, Mark, who was coming to town, because all of a sudden these groups were kind of coalescing around the idea that how are we going to get the state action plan action taken? We need some advocacy groups to step up and talk to elected officials, probably raise money and do all these things to make it a reality. So we started forming what's now the Stop Carp Coalition. So these are just some of the groups that have been, part of our coalition from inception, and it includes sort of Minnesota-based, Wisconsin-based groups, but also national organizations like my own and NWF, and all coming together to realize that together we can advance some strategies to protect our waterways. So while we had the scientists and the experts from the agencies, we were the advocates that were going to actually see what we could actually get done and advance via the action plan. Now, one strategy that did not land in the plan but came up during conversation was, what if we just closed the uppermost lock on the Mississippi River at the St. Anthony Falls? Because this was sort of, like they said, the northernmost lock, but also had not as much commercial use at the time. There were less businesses, etc. So the idea was, what if we just close this? This is just for orientation purposes, so you can see where it is on the river, very central to the Mississippi River in Minneapolis, right in the heart where these falls are. And the idea with this location is the falls were already sort of a natural barrier to any fish movement. But with the building of the lock, it was what really made it possible for migration to go beyond that point. So perhaps if we shut the doors of this lock permanently, we could stop fish from migrating beyond that. But like I said, it wasn't necessarily a strategy that the agencies wanted to advance. It didn't land in the plan, but that didn't deter us as advocates. It was like, hey, this is a challenge. Let's see if this is something we can actually support, along with some of the other things that we were thinking about. So as we got started, we really engaged in a lot of stakeholder meetings, trying to educate everyone about the threat and why we needed to do something about that. At one of those stakeholder meetings, then Congressman, now AG Ellison, his staff was at the meeting, and they were like, well, this lock closure, how can we do that? Is that a thing that we just can do? And we realized it's a Corps-owned property. It would require federal legislation. So we started talking to his office about putting together some legislation that would close that lock. And so we started that conversation. We were really glad to have some leadership in Congress to do that, and especially by the congressman where this lock sits. I mean, that was really critical to have his support. In the meantime, our coalition was, again, trying to do outreach and education. We set up a website. We set up, a Facebook page, and we partnered with the DNR and held regular forums to bring people together to share information. Doing everything we could to find ways to address the threat. I thought it'd be fun to share some of our failed things that we tried. One of which was, we knew that every time these locks were open, it was potential for carp to move through them. And so we thought, what if we can just get to people and say, hey, please don't use the locks if you don't need to. Like the folks that were kayaking and paddling on the river, every time they went to one of these structures, the Corps would open the doors for them and let them through. Not anymore, now that they're underutilized, but at that time they did. So I found this in my archives. We made these cute little keychains, we're giving them out at the marinas, hey, don't use the locks. And we had like a little, identifier card and, all these things just really to try to get people to help us. Don't think that was successful, but it was successful in at least telling people this is a problem, we need to do something about it. The other thing we did was we met with our state director of our Department of the Department of Economic Development because we knew that businesses were still utilizing the upper lock, and if they weren't getting to use it, that could be a cost to them. So we thought other ways to find dollars to compensate them for that so they wouldn't use it. Again, it was she took the meeting, but it really went nowhere. So we kept going on with our ideas and what we could do. And the thing I think was very successful for us is we were lucky to get some funding from the McKnight Foundation, and we ended up conducting a statewide poll, both about like, hey, are you aware this is a threat, but what sort of strategies would you support? One being, of course, lock closure. So we put that together and did a big release, a public release of that in 2013 to show that 63% of registered voters on all sides of the aisle supported lock closure, and that really helped us build more support for the legislation. We eventually got a Republican to sign on in the House bill and support it, and then Representative Walz, now Governor Walz, even supported it, even though it had nothing to do with his district. And we were able to get Senator Klobuchar to support a Senate companion bill. So that was really critical in getting that congressional support. And then it was a matter of time to find what vehicle were we going to get this attached to get it going. And luckily in 2014, the Water Resources Development Act was on its way to being put together and passed. So our authors, Senator Klobuchar and White and Keith Ellison at the podium celebrating. Spoiler alert, it got passed, but they were able to attach it to the bill. One of the things that happened at the end is in the Senate side, as we were negotiating for the passage of this bill to close the lock, the Illinois senators were not at all happy about the language where we specifically said we're closing these locks because of carp, because they did not want it to have any precedent-setting nature with regard to what they were trying to do at the Great Lakes. So ultimately at the end, the language just said, this lock shall close within 1 year passage of this bill. And so in fact, it passed in 2014 and this lock closed June 10th, 2015. So it's already been almost 10 years, I can't even believe it, that we've been working on this and also that it closed. So now with the lock closure, there's been new opportunities for us in the Twin Cities. Soon after it was closed, the Park Service was like, hey, the Corps probably doesn't want to operate the tours they were doing there because they were already doing very minimal tours, but there's a little visitor center there and it's kind of exciting, it's right by these falls. So the Park Service got a special permit and started doing the tours, visitor tours out there. And it went from 2,000 visitors at that site. Again, it's central to the Minneapolis riverfront. Only 2,000 people were going there. With the Park Service there, it increased tenfold. So it was really exciting opportunity to get folks out there and also to educate people about carp. So this is inside of the visitor center at that location where you can see the falls. And for me as an advocate for the national parks, I also saw it as an opportunity to really showcase that we have a national park here, having the rangers out in this really visited area of the park. Now the Corps was not very happy, of course. I think my face was on a dartboard somewhere in the Corps hallways after this lock closed. But they decided, what are we going to do with the structure and what are we going to do with the lower and lock 1, the 2 locks right below it, because they were all tied together navigationally. And the Corps didn't want to have to spend a dime there anymore when it's not serving its original purpose, authorized mission, which was navigation. So they've since started 2 different disposition studies to determine the future of those 3 locks. And what do you know, they're still going 10 years later, but we're keeping at it. The other thing, but in the meantime, our community's finding ways to really embrace this closed infrastructure. There's been some art installations with light shows. This is a mock-up that we did of the potential of the space to actually be able to, be an interpretive board for, talking about the history of navigation there. And more recently, we have an organization called Awamni Yamni Okoto Dayapi, which is a Dakota-led organization in a nonprofit that is now working to transform several acres next to the lock and really bring it back to its natural state as a place of healing, connection, and education. So now my organization is now kind of turning below my attention, towards the locks right below that now that the upper lock is closed and this great organization is moving that forward. This is Lock and Dam number 1. If some of you might be going on the tour tomorrow to visit this location, this is a part of the other study that's ongoing along the lower lock. What's on the table potentially though during this study is for the potential for removal. Could we remove these structures and restore a free-flowing river in the Mississippi River for the first time in over 100 years? So that's a big conversation we're having right now, and it's a very exciting conversation. And so that's sort of where we're at right now, is trying to follow and understand the pros and cons of removal. We're not, as an organization, taking a position as yet. There's a lot for us to understand in terms of, what's in the sediment that's built up. We don't want to send any bad chemicals downstream. But we have developed some imagery that we're helping to kind of reach out and do outreach with the communities so they can see that, first of all, if we remove these structures, it's not going to flood out. I mean, it's actually in a gorge, so the water will actually be going down. But it might make us, might have a different river again, and there might be new recreational opportunities. So it's an exciting, emerging conversation. As I always like to say, closing the locked doors open new opportunities for us here in the Twin Cities to rethink about our relationship with the Mississippi River. So that's where we're at right now. But once we closed that lock, we knew our work wasn't done. We knew that. We knew that we had a lot more of the state that was unprotected and other things needed to happen in order to protect the waters downstream of the upper lock. And so I'm now going to turn it over to my co-chair, Colleen, to talk about what we've been doing, the last decade, I guess, now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colleen O'Connor Tuberman. I'm the Land Use and Planning Director at Friends of the Mississippi River, which is an advocacy organization based here in the Twin Cities, and a collaborator with NWF on several issues. And as Chris said, I'm the other co-chair of the Stop Carp Coalition. I love that Chris's slide had a press conference photo, because this is a photo from our most recent press conference last year for our next success story. And you'll see in here NWF staff, NWF affiliates like Brad, all in this photo from this exciting next accomplishment that we had. So as Chris said, we knew when I joined Friends of the Mississippi River in 2019 that the lock closure had been a huge success, but that the work wasn't done. There were still 175 miles of Mississippi River and its tributaries in Minnesota that were south of the upper St. Anthony Falls Lock and had really no protection at all. So Stop Carp Coalition had been focusing on two key things. One was advancing state-funded research into the best location for a deterrent system within Minnesota. The second one was lobbying the DNR to update its invasive carp action plan to incorporate that new research and other, new emerging findings. And the Stop Carp Coalition members participated very closely as stakeholders in that action plan update. This pictured here is Dr. Peter Sorensen, recently retired from the University of Minnesota, who led a lot of this deterrent research. And his research found that Lock and Dam 5, which is downstream of here near Winona, was the best location in Minnesota for a carp deterrent. Due to a variety of design factors here at this site, you could achieve a 98-99% blockage rate with the deterrent system in the lock chamber, kind of fortifying the existing design of the site. And at least for a long time, that's enough. A few invasive fish is not an ecological catastrophe make. It's really when they reach the population density, if they need to start spawning, that you've got a problem. A couple of things about Lock and Dam 5 that are distinct. One is that open river conditions are infrequent. The dam gates don't open very often, so carp can bypass locks and dams in two ways. They can swim over the dam in high water, or they can travel through the lock chamber when boats are going through it. And the dam gates don't get overtopped here and open very often, and there aren't back channel bypasses around this lock and dam. The pool upstream of it is also relatively short, which makes it an easier place to round up and remove the carp that do bypass or slip past the deterrent. And this location protects a couple of the most important tributary systems we have in Minnesota. The Minnesota River, which is in southwest Minnesota, and the St. Croix River, which runs up the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. These are both enormous watersheds, and their confluences are upstream of Lock and Dam 5, so would gain protection from a deterrent at Lock and Dam 5. Here are a couple pictures of the lock. This is the dam with the lock on the very far left. A couple different kinds of dam gates in place there, and this is the lock chamber itself. So advocating for the implementation of this research really became the Stop Carp Coalition's main focus over the last few years. And while we were doing that advocacy, the news just kept on coming. The DNR kept having record-breaking catches of invasive carp in Minnesota, all at just below Lock and Dam 5. This underscored the importance of this site as both a place where the carp are reaching and a place where they don't seem to be bypassing in very high numbers. They seem to be kind of stacking up below this dam, having difficulty bypassing it, which really underscores the value of further fortifying that spot. And the Stop Carp Coalition was very active in the media about this. We stuck to two key messages, one saying, the carp are here, this is an emergency, we don't have time to wait. And the other being, there is a solution at hand, we have research, we know what we can do, we just need to fund it. And we did fund it. So about this time last year, the Minnesota legislature appropriated $12 million to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources to build a deterrent system at Lock and Dam 5, and we do believe that that $12 million is adequate for the cost of this, the complete cost of this project, or almost the complete cost. This was funded by the Minnesota Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Fund. Minnesota is fortunate to have two dedicated environmental funding sources, both enshrined in our state constitution with very enthusiastic voter support. So one of them is this Legacy Fund, that's a sales tax amendment that funded the deterrent. The other one is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, that's a lottery money. That money funded Dr. Sorensen's research. So both of those funds really are essential to this work. The money, well appropriated to the DNR, of course, the DNR cannot do this project on its own. We need our federal partners at the table. The Army Corps owns the lock there. The Army Corps, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and USGS have all been very, very good partners in this. They're all very good collaborators, and they're all very enthused about this project. There were times, and really most of the time their advocacy, the Minnesota DNR actually was really hesitant to take this on. They did not want to do this. They actively opposed us at the Capitol. But having the enthusiastic support of federal partners made a big difference, both in knowing that this was science that we could trust from people who know their invasive carp, and in assuring lawmakers that this is a viable and worthwhile project. People ask us a lot why we didn't seek funding from Wisconsin as well. That was really a matter of practicality. This project is relatively low cost. And the Stop Carp Coalition has most of our ties in Minnesota. We have a stronger presence there, a stronger grassroots advocate network, and we just didn't really have the relationships to lobby effectively in Wisconsin. And we want to get the project done as quickly as possible. And the more different funding sources you try to assemble, as you see in the Brandon Road project, the longer it takes and the more difficult it is. So we just focused on Minnesota as sort of a matter of practicality. And we think that the ROI is there for our state. The DNR was given a 2029 installation deadline in the legislation, and that should be reachable. So what are some of the key things that we undertook as a Stop Carp Coalition? One is that we held a lot of grassroots community meetings. Do we have a slide? Oh no, they just got it first. Okay, so we had a lot of grassroots community meetings in river cities up and down about 130 miles of the Mississippi River. Some with legislators, some without, but we had about 250 folks attend these meetings about last year, early 2024, and learn about invasive carp and press for implementation of solutions. And the Minnesota DNR actually joined us at all of these meetings and was a really constructive partner, despite their opposition to the deterrent. I think we got to have good, candid conversations about the pros and cons of these different approaches at these meetings. Of course, we did a lot of direct lobbying with legislators. We took them out to Lock and Dam 5. We also had hearings and meetings at the state capitol. A little side note here about these cute kids in bike helmets. This is the Wurst family, their mom's on the left, and they are active members of Friends of the Mississippi River's Grassroots Advocacy Network. And we did an invasive carp webinar a while back, and the whole family watched it together. And the kids asked a question. They saw those videos of silver carp jumping. They said, well, how are we gonna go boating if those fish get here? And I kind of gave an offhand answer. I said, well, definitely wear your PFD, but also maybe a bike helmet. And they took that and they ran with it, and they showed up to a legislative hearing with bike helmets. This became this enduring image for the rest of that session. Legislators, of course, love the photo op, as you can see here. But they also continued to talk about that issue. We don't want to wear helmets on the river for the entire rest of the session. And on both sides of the aisle, this issue really gathered bipartisan support through that process. And we had a lot of communication. So I mentioned our media messaging. We also had a lot of online communications for advocates. So, action alert emails and petitions that the Stop Carp Coalition members sent out. As much as we're excited about this and staying involved in the implementation, we know that the work is not done here in Minnesota. As Mark mentioned, there are strategies that we simply don't have in our toolbox yet that we know we need. Deterrents are not 100% effective. Nothing we have right now is 100% effective. And so we need to continue advancing more research, both nationally and something specific to places like Minnesota where carp abundance is relatively low. Some of the tactics that have been developed elsewhere aren't as useful here. So we need research into deterrence at dam gates. We have research, we know how to do research in lock chamber, or how to do deterrence in lock chambers. That doesn't help spillway gate areas. They might be able to do some research on that as part of the Lock and Dam 5 project. We need better removal techniques, as has been discussed. And we need to have a conversation about genetic biocontrols. It's both sort of a biology and a policy question. There's good leadership on that one in particular, being led by the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, or MASERC, at the University of Minnesota. I'll give them credit for being an excellent research partner here, and I know that they're one of tomorrow's tour stops. And with that, I think we're ready to move downstream and hear about more work elsewhere. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Colleen.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and congratulations on Lock and Dam 5 and all the success you guys have. This is a story from about 10 years ago, so it actually is a pretty good one because it happened quickly also, like this project came together. Mark did a good job on the overview. This kind of viral video was definitely causing panic in the Great Lakes 15 years ago. All the Great Lakes states attorney generals sued the Corps of Engineers to close the locks in Chicago. The Corps did take their job very seriously of figuring out how to come up with a control plan that would satisfy the federal court and get this lawsuit dismissed. So they were not just thinking about it in court terms, they were under federal court order to get things accomplished. So that helped us get things launched. In 2010, I was selected by the White House Council on Environmental Quality to coordinate a plan with all the federal agencies and the state DNR groups. Part of that project, as Mark mentioned earlier, was the Great Lakes Mississippi River Interbasin Study. And it looked at, from Minnesota to New York, every possible point where water access could possibly allow not just carp, but any invasive species to move. So they were doing a pretty broad study of even small water connections in flood stage areas where invasive species could cross. Fort Wayne, Indiana came up as the #2 at-risk location. So pretty quickly after that report came out, we had a meeting in Fort Wayne, and literally in a few hours of discussion with all of the agencies involved, we were able to come up with a consensus that we were going to do the simplest thing possible, which is to build an earth berm across this wetland. So what you had is a naturally functioning wetland on a historically significant area. This is where the portage from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River took place. Native Americans for centuries and French traders and others using that as a connection, especially in the springtime when it was flooded. It was very easy to float your boats across Eagle Marsh and get to the Mississippi River or the other way. So, okay, we had an agreement that we were going to do this simple project, but there were many difficulties. First of all, NRCS, anyone that has worked with them on their wetland reserve program, you know that they're pretty particular about what you can do to any of their properties after they've invested their money and restored a wetland. So we had a completed wetland restoration project that was going to be completely disrupted by moving the Continental Divide to the middle of this wetland to say, no, not only can no carp get through, but no invasive species can get through. Also, we had the local property owners at Little River Wetlands Land Trust freaking out because they thought they had a completed project that was really coming back to fruition, and we were going to completely destroy their whole project. But they got over their being upset pretty quickly. Everybody jumped in and started doing everything possible to get it accomplished, and it was just a matter of about 2.5 or 3 years, Mark, from when we had the decision that not only did these groups work together, they were busting ass to get paperwork processed, to get things approved. The Corps of Engineers had to redo their flood maps for the city of Fort Wayne because this backs water up on the Maumee River side into the city of Fort Wayne. So they had to redraw all of their flood maps based on a new permanent barrier to water being able to drain out to the Wabash in a big flood on the Fort Wayne city side. They got that done in a matter of months and approved by the Louisville District of the Corps of Engineers. This is unheard of in Corps lore, and it was done. Also, to get around doing it as a Corps project, NRCS agreed to do it as an NRCS project. So we did it by Ag Department standards, and the local NRCS guys designed it and really worked with all the utilities and everybody to get it to function. And it was incredible what NRCS people were doing to help us with a fish problem for about 2 years. They really put a lot of effort into it. And they put $4 million of funding from NRCS to get it done the way they wanted it done. The other groups that had to stay on board were the local people. We had the Drainage Board, the surveyor, City of Fort Wayne, constantly having to reassure them that we weren't going to flood Fort Wayne. Because Fort Wayne's been underwater. Downtown Fort Wayne's been underwater, in the last 10 years a couple of times. And they were really worried about this new barrier, that it was going to really mess up Fort Wayne for flooding. So it hasn't been a problem. It's working. It's doing okay. Here's the completed look. So, it's pretty cool. Since then, there's been a trail added that is used a lot. So we've got a pathway to go out into the wetlands where you get to experience walking on the Continental Divide for 1.7 miles. And, you can spit one way or the other and it will drain to the respective ocean. And I think it has really turned out to be a win-win for the Land Trust, Fort Wayne, and everybody locally. And there's another sign there about parting the waters. I'm very proud to say we got this one done. You can see that the restorations come back with the normal pollinators and everything flourishing there next to the Continental Divide sign. And I am currently on the board of the local land trust. They have forgiven me. And so we're still working on making Eagle Marsh a great experience for everybody in Fort Wayne. So we lucked out and it worked. Thanks.
Great, thanks, John. Horace.
Yeah, I'm Horace Tipton. I'm the policy director with the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and I am a late add to this because I'm really just pinch hitting for my boss, Mike Butler, who wasn't able to make it to the meeting this week. But I've been with the Federation for about 2 years. Our work on this issue long predates me, something that Mike's been working on for a long time. Of course, Tennessee, we're bordered by the Mississippi River in the west. We also have the Tennessee River system going through most of our state. Actually, even though I don't have slides, I'm going to try to go back to your map. that was in Mark's slides way back here. Just to give you all some context for this. Because like Mark said, you know, there are a lot of invasive carp in the Mississippi River, and fishing out the lower Mississippi is probably not feasible at this point. But what we've done is we've focused on the Tennessee River system and tried to stop their spread up into the upper Tennessee.
One with dots.
The one with dots, there we go, there's past it.
That's it.
There we go, that'll work.
Let it go.
Yeah. So we focus primarily around here and here. The Tennessee River flows here, you know, through between West Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, and then up into Upper East Tennessee, and is, of course, flows into Mississippi about here. And that's, like I say, it's been the primary focus of our efforts against invasive carp in Tennessee. Our strategy on this, working with the agency and federal partners as well, has been, I think Mike dubbed it the block and tackle strategy. You know, we've got to get barriers in place, but we also have to incentivize through harvest, getting carp out of the Tennessee River system. So the first one I want to talk about is our Asian Carp Harvest Incentive Program. It started in 2018, focused on Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake. And the way it's worked is they incentivize the wholesalers and kind of set a minimum price that they pay to commercial fishermen. Require them to pay at least 19 cents a pound. And then the TWRA, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, has paid 15 of those 19 cents. And through that, they've been able to get a total of about 37 million pounds of carp out of Kentucky and Barkley Lakes. What's really interesting though on that, because to Mark's point, fishing out these fish is very difficult, but because we haven't seen the recruitment that we thought we would see in Kentucky Lake several years ago, we've seen a downtrend in how many carp are being pulled out of Kentucky Lake every year. In 2020, is about 2.7 million pounds were harvested, probably because commercial fishermen weren't up to speed yet. By 2021, they were harvesting 7.4 million pounds. It went up to 7.7 in 2022, 8 million in 2023, and as 2024 started going down, 6.9 billion pounds, and now we're on track to probably harvest about 5 million pounds this year. Our feedback that we've gotten from commercial fishermen in Kentucky Lake is that they're struggling now to hit those numbers that they have been in the past, which it's been great. And you know, a big part of that is because again that we're not seeing the recruitment into Kentucky Lake from the Mississippi River system, and also because we're pulling more of those carp out of there. What we're doing right now, or what the agency's doing right now, is they're continuing, of course, to survey the Upper Tennessee River system. So far, we have not found any carp up there in the last couple of years, and continuing to monitor in Kentucky and Barkley Lake to try to get a better understanding of what causes carp to move up the Tennessee River system. With that success on the incentive side in Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, they've actually been able to move some of that harvest incentive to the Mississippi River and kind of move the commercial fishermen over there to try to get some of the carp out of the Tennessee section of the Mississippi River. The other part of our strategy has been around barriers, and that's been a long, ongoing issue for us. We've been successful in getting one barrier in Barkley Lake, which is, if you're familiar with the land between the lakes in Kentucky and Tennessee, right around there. And that's been successful for the Cumberland River system. We don't have a significant carp issue on the Cumberland River system. Right now, we're trying to get one at Kentucky Lake as well, because again, as many fish as we pull out of there, we've got to have the barriers in place too to keep them from coming up the Tennessee River. I think if there's one through line through all these different projects, getting the Corps to do things is difficult sometimes. The main issue we're having right now is finding the right non-federal sponsor, because of course, this is something that Tennessee really wants, something the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency really wants. The actual barrier would be in Kentucky. We are constitutionally prohibited from spending money in Kentucky and getting our state appropriations. Likewise, getting a barrier at Pickwick, which is kind of on the south end of Tennessee, right as you get to Alabama, that would primarily benefit Alabama. Tennessee legislature doesn't want to spend money on that. So actually placing that barrier and getting those agreements in place is the primary challenge we're facing right now. We have political support for it. It's something that both our Tennessee legislature and our Tennessee congressional delegation broadly support getting something done about this. One thing that's unique to the Kentucky Lake area is how big of a portion of the local economy is around some of the fishing tournaments that have historically been there. They lost that several years ago, largely because of the carp problem. And the congressmen from there, the local legislators from there, have been ardent supporters of getting a solution to the carp problem on the Tennessee River. Actually, one state legislator lost an election because he was not supportive of that. It gets broad support in Tennessee because it is such a ever-present issue for anybody that fishes in West Tennessee. I'd say the one issue we have in kind of political support is that some of our East Tennessee legislators want us to prioritize East Tennessee first, which is more of an issue than you might think. But I guess I'll leave that there. I mean, I think that the main thing for us is that we have seen success in our harvest incentive program, but we're still trying to get federal money to build our barriers, get those in place.
All right. Let's give it up for all our panelists, please. Before I open up for questions, I wanted to kind of connect a common thread between all these stories, and one of them that is probably the most significant that to talk about is what's happening at Brandon Road. The technology that they're trying to put in at that lock is essentially the same technology at Barkley Lake. That was an experimental program for sound, essentially putting sound into the water systems. You know, we always call it, people are saying, are you pumping AC/DC in there, or are you pumping Enya? I don't know what carp don't like, I don't know. It seems like AC/DC might be the better sound to put in there, but that technology...
It's more like 50 horses motors.
50 horses. So that technology is going to be duplicative up at Brandon Road, and also potentially at Lock and Dam 5. The Corps turned around, it wasn't necessarily, they were always very helpful, slow, they're under slow, obviously, agency to work through this stuff, but they want this technology because they could potentially use this system elsewhere in other river systems. So that's a common thread about carp that's going to be potentially in the future for other projects as they see the spread continue. And not just carp, other invasive species as well. So that's one thread I wanted to point out. So we got about 25 minutes. I know this is between a break and happy hour. I'm just very cognizant of that because I want to be at happy hour too. I'm sure you all do too. But I want to open up for questions. We purposed a lot of time for you all to ask questions. So please, if you have questions, let's hear them. Yeah.
Maybe this is a really ignorant question. Like, why is the electric barrier so controversial? Like, is it just because it sounds scary and dangerous, or are there other things I don't know?
Good question. I think it's two things. Number one, is it effective is the first thing. There have been studies to suggest that smaller fry can make it through, when a boat goes through the lock chamber, through the electrical barrier, in its wake, it can make it through. That's the first thing. Is it 100% effective? And it also doesn't stop any kind of virus or any kind of other bacteria that could be a problematic. So that's the first thing.
Or if I've got one too. With the current electric barrier, if a person fell in the water, they would not come out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Instant death.
That's the second thing, is safety. Safety.
Makes sense.
I really should have gone more into the biodiversity fish nets too, but kind of on that same line, one difference with the bath and some of the electric barriers is it is much better at just targeting carp. I believe it's the same thing that makes them jump. It's the same frequency that makes them jump is what prevents them from going upriver with the bath, which is why it's a preferable alternative in addition to the safety issues too, obviously.
Yeah, native fish can't hear the same frequency that the Thank you. The native fish in the Mississippi River can't hear the frequency that these invasive carp are evolved to hate. And so it seems quite promising that these deterrent systems actually do not deter upstream passage of native fish beyond what the dams are already doing.
Mike?
thanks for the presentation. Colleen, question for you. You mentioned the exploration potentially of biological controls. Can you clarify, are you talking about like a gene drive or something else?
Could be a variety of things. So what the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center is working on right now is common carp. And, you know, can you release something in the water that makes the carp sterile, makes them unable to reproduce? You know, I don't know what all the options are, what's really viable, but not only do we have to develop science that we trust, but we also have to develop the policy and political willingness to implement those solutions if we feel comfortable with them. And it might be a while before we do, but I wouldn't want the science to be there and the politics to not be ready to implement good science if we reach that point. So the Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center at the U of M is actually working on both sides to understand what are the policy and kind of public concerns, objections, what specific policies we would need to change, all of that, so that if there's a science that we can implement, we can get the political will to do so. But I'm uneasy about some of that too. You know, I don't know that we're there yet, but might be a tool that we get in the future.
I could add.
I thought you would have add something. Just so you know, John is very humble here. He was appointed by the CEQ during Obama's administration. He's more kind of, I should have introduced you as the carp czar. That was his title. I'm not kidding, it's carp.
That was when it was a bigger crisis. It's just fun title now. Actually, USGS fisheries specialists spent several years looking at alternative ways to get rid of invasive carp. And all of them were determined to be not feasible for various problems. So they did look at, is there a disease that could be introduced? They did look at, could they alter genes? Could they introduce, any other predators, any other things that they could do biologically? All of those were ruled out because of unknowns and unintended consequences that we're familiar with from other such experiments. And so after probably 5 years of millions of dollars of research, it was determined that fishing them down was the one that everyone could still agree on, with fisheries biologists in the States and otherwise agreeing with that. And so Minnesota, good luck if they can find something, but they've looked hard already.
I mean, introducing pike to prey on carp fry has been one of the suggestions too, but there's all sorts of ideas
Well,
for that.
garfish.
And garfish, right?
Yeah.
Right? Having said that though, we got into this problem from introducing carp into the States to deal with another problem.
To avoid using chemicals.
Correct.
To take these nutrients out of fish farming ponds and to stop using chemicals. They thought they were doing a brilliant thing.
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife Service theoretically brought in carp to do that. And so we've learned the lesson of don't introduce another invasive to deal with the problem. But there have been some really huge achievements in dealing with invasive species, like the sea lamprey, for example, has the sea lampricide, which is highly effective.
Right.
You put that in the water body, it just knocks out their reproductive organs and sometimes even kills them. It's very effective. So that's a biological research component that's been super effective. So in certain instances, it does work. Any other questions? Yes, Lisa.
Yeah, so thank you for this presentation, very informative. Working with businesses, I think we get the questions a lot from sort of a place of having less knowledge about fish and the science of it. And so when these DNA pieces are found above the barriers, I get a lot of questions around like is the solution still going to work? And are we already too late? Is it still worth it? Can you talk a little bit about like how to message that or how to respond to some of those questions when we're finding, evidence of carp sort of past the barriers already?
Anyone want to do that?
I'll
John?
start.
Good question, Lisa.
It was front page news for years in Chicago that we were finding DNA in downtown Chicago. And it really turned out that boats that had been in water downstream, whether that was barges and shipping people, or even DNR's own vessels that we were doing the testing with, some of them had been in water downstream and then were used up there. That introduced carp DNA above the barrier. So, of course, we cleaned up all of our procedures and got very careful about that, and we had a lot less findings after that. But you can still find evidence of carp DNA that could have been carried there by a fisherman with equipment that had been in carp water. So it doesn't answer all the questions, but we think that's probably where a lot of it came from.
You're doing your work here, moving this mic.
It's a workout. Do my lunges.
We did get that question a lot from Minnesota lawmakers too, because we do have documented invasive carp above Locking Dam 5. The numbers are relatively low as far as we know. So you don't always know what you don't know. One thing I point out a lot is that, as I said in my presentation, a couple of silver carp aren't a big problem, right? It's when they really reach a certain population density that we really see the impact. So just because we may have them in some areas doesn't mean that we have them to the point where it's not worth trying to stop them from reaching population densities that would allow for successful spawning and much bigger levels of reproduction. Something we know is that it's kind of hard to predict, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's hard to predict when carp are going to reach the population density to trigger a spawning event. The charts of populations in some of these areas go low, 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 high. And that might be due to a seasonal condition, but it's not something we can control or predict. And so there's kind of this dual thing of just because a few carp are here doesn't mean it's not worth doing anything. But just because we only have a few doesn't mean that it's not urgent. Because we don't know when the problem will get urgent. We don't have a very reliable way of predicting that.
And we found out from invasive species, its management over the years, it's much easier and more effective and more costly effective to do a prevention strategy than a management strategy. And look at the zebra mussels. If we were to prevent them from coming in, we wouldn't be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, every year to clean up and the impact of the fishery. So we have a chance now to keep them out of the new water. We have to go all in to do that. It's much more effective to keep them out of the new water than to get them in and then manage them. So, yeah.
Do you all find that, managing some of the sensationalism around the invasive carp? I was in Chicago as a postdoc for 3 years, maybe around 2012, 2013. And also when the alligator gar story came out, which was terrible as a gar scientist, that wasn't going to solve the issue. But you find that, there was the eDNA that they found, and then, that raised alarms, but we later found out that, the techniques, weren't as accurate as they are now. But all of you working in the invasive carp sector, do you find that it's easier to manage sort of the fear and sensationalism? How do you balance that with this is a very real problem? Yet, let's not do what happened, 10 years ago. It seemed like every little thing might be a silver bullet or this might be a major problem. How do you manage sort of the public sort of fear versus concern side of things? I'm just curious about that across the board. Okay.
It's not spot on to your question, but one example, I mentioned kind of East Tennessee being an issue for us, and it is because they found DNA evidence of carp being on Tellico Lake. One time, they found one dead carp. There is a conspiracy theory that somebody put the carp there to try to get, there's a long story there. I'm not going to get into all of it. And managing that group of folks has presented a lot of challenges because the local elected officials and the congressmen from up there that's where this movement to get, to not base where we put our barriers on science, but to do it there because my people are panicking, right? It's been a major challenge, and the way we've pushed back against that is by, working with the agency to show really the elected officials, not so much the public, for this particular issue, show them the data on where we have found carbon, what our electrofishing studies have shown. When we show them the data about the upper Tennessee, that tends to kind of sway the elected officials anyway. There's nothing we're ever going to do to tell people on Tellico Lake that Asian carp aren't coming tomorrow. But yeah.
I guess one example of that is that I started in this work in 2007. And you could imagine my fatigue in this, our fatigue in this, but the public's fatigue in this. And we really struggled with that. When there was a time, and I'll single out just the Chicago Brandon Road story, where it was chaos, it was uncertainty, we didn't know how the locks, were the carp gonna get in the next day, we just didn't know. So that created this hysteria moment. And you never want to lose the advantage of a crisis to advance what we needed. But I think in retrospect, having what we know now, you're never going to close the locks. It's never going to. You can't close the locks in Chicago because Chicago will flood, right? And so we were very knee-jerky at first, and then it got locked down in this bureaucratic morass, and it got the Corps. I mean, anyone who's worked with the Corps knows they study and they study and they study. Now, my brother works for the Corps, so I will defend the Corps to some degree. They do good work, but it lost public attention. It literally went off the map when they were trying to figure out a way to do this Brandon Road, for example. But what kept it going was Minnesota. It's popping up in Minnesota, Indiana. And what really got Chicago and Brandon Road back on track was what's happening in Kentucky and Tennessee. Because what happened is, who's very powerful from Kentucky in the US Senate? Any guesses?
Mitch supported
Mitch McConnell. And we were telling the story that this is not just a Great Lakes problem, this is a national problem. It's everywhere. We have to attack this issue with all our wherewithal in all these places. And so that kind of got it back up to 1A of the newspaper again. And I think that helped advance the project. And the technology that was being used in Kentucky helped Chicago. So I think a lot of our campaigns we work on have these ups and downs and ebbs and flows. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're really not lucky. But the one thing, besides these opportunistic things that kind of kept carp back on the page, was that no one wants these things. No one wants these things, and by showing that what happens to a river system, no one wants that to be in their river. No town wants to have to deal with this river that is jumping fish, that you can't recreate in, that you can't fish in. And so that really helped keep it up. So we had to fight through a lot of, was it from the boats from the EDA? Is there really carp there? You found a live capture of carp in Lake Calumet. You found a live bighead on that lakeside, but you haven't seen anything since. They've done more EDA testings, even in the Michigan rivers, nothing. So, but the threat is still there because they see these videos. They know it's real. We don't want it. And I think we've convinced the public and the decision makers that prevention is so much better than management, and we don't want it because we don't want to waste money on management. Yeah.
Glad to hear that Minnesota was helpful. I would say, I've been at this since 2011 as well. And after that, the lot closed. We weren't going to pack up our things and go home. We knew work continued, but there were quiet phases. And we as advocates actually went to the DNR because they weren't reporting catches. They weren't putting them online. So people thought that a problem was over. And we're like, no, we're still getting catches along the way, and they were increasing. And so we were going to them like, you need to make sure you're putting out press releases every time you get a catch of invasive carp, because it's hard to go and talk to state lawmakers and ask them for money for something if they don't think it's a threat anymore. So when you brought that up, I'm thinking we had to kind of make sure that the urgency continued. We wanted that urgency because that's how we got action by our congressional members and our lawmakers. So just add that too. Sometimes it's to your advantage, especially as an advocate.
All right, last call for questions.
Kobe.
Yeah. Thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate it very much. And we'll see everyone later.